Captain, we have them! We've established Transporter Lock, the Star Trek podcast. Join Ken and crew each week as they explore strange new episodes, seek out new plots and new characters, and boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
Hello and welcome to Transporter Lock, where we are currently reviewing the latest season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Today we're discussing Season 3, Episodes 5 through 6, which makes this the third podcast episode reviewing this season, because we do 2 episodes at a time, and episode 153 of Transporter Lock, for those of you who have been listening since the very beginning. I'm your co-host, Chief Engineer Ken Gagne, and joining me is M. McGinnis. Hello, M.
Hi, Ken. Strange indeed.
Is it all that strange?
I have a lot to say, especially about this first one, but we'll get there. How are you?
I am doing delightfully. I am enjoying Star Trek. It occurred to me that of the 5 new Star Trek series that have started in the last 8 years, 4 of them have gone off the air, those being Discovery, Prodigy, Lower Decks, and Picard. So right now we only have Strange New Worlds and soon Starfleet Academy, which means I don't know what the next show will be after this season of Strange New Worlds ends, because we don't have any air dates for season 4 of Strange New Worlds or season 1 of Starfleet Academy, except probably 2026.
Yeah, that sounds about right. You never know these days with streaming. They don't have to meet like, the summer hiatus season is over and we have to launch things in September.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
It does make a 1-year subscription to Paramount Plus less compelling than it used to be, because it used to go Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek, and now it's Star Trek, long pause, Star Trek. So maybe I should switch to a monthly subscription.
Does it save you any money doing it that way?
It probably will. It's just one more thing for me to remember to start and stop, because I'm sure we've all been in that position where you sign up for something and you forget to cancel it and they just keep billing you.
Yeah, I went through that with Disney actually for a little while. I had decided that I needed to take a break from all of the Star Trek shows or Star Wars shows that were less interesting. And just forgot to cancel. I don't really watch anything else on Disney Plus lately, but it was 6 or 7 months of still being billed, and that adds up in a hurry.
Yeah, I had signed up for a Disney Hulu package to watch the Tron Uprising cartoon. And when I
Mhm.
finished, I canceled Disney Plus, not realizing that that would only cancel the Disney Plus half of the Disney Hulu package. And I kept getting
Yeah.
billed for Hulu, which would have been fine if I had kept watching it. But no, it wasn't until I finally sat down and started using a budgeting app. You Need a Budget, or YNAB for short. And I don't really use the budgeting aspect of it, but it does force me to acknowledge and categorize every single charge that gets made to my account. So
Oh,
nothing.
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of apps that do that, but it just basically asks me like, hey, you got charged for Hulu. What category do you want to put that in? And you make up your own categories. So I was like, oh, I
Sure.
don't want to put that in any category. So,
Yeah, I actually just recently went through and canceled a bunch of software subscriptions that were things that I tried out for a couple of months and forgot to cancel because it was through the App Store. And I went in and looked at that little subscription tab, and wow, I was like, oh my, I'm actually spending a lot of money on stuff I'm not using, and going through and canceling it was kind of, I mean, it was a pain, but it felt good. And it sounds like maybe that YNAB thing is something worth checking out, or I'm sure there are other versions that do similar tasks.
yeah, if you want to check out YNAB, I can give you a referral link, which would be kgagne.com. That's my name, letter K, GAGNE.com/YNAB, YNAB. And that gets you some sort of a discount. And I'm sure that they have a refund policy that I haven't looked at. This is not a planned promotion. This is not like related to Transporter Lock. We just started talking about Paramount Plus, and here it is.
Yeah, I was going to say this is not a live ad read or anything like that.
No, we
We just
don't.
kind of got off track.
No, there's only one affiliate that we actually do associate with Star Trek, and I don't want to have too many ads in one episode. So let's go in and start talking about season 3, episode 5, Through the Lens of Time. Would you like me to give a brief summary of this episode?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Cool. So this is where Nurse Chapel and her boyfriend Corby are going down to an alien planet to investigate what they discover are actually alien ruins, and they have a couple of other people with them, like Ortegas's brother is there, who we briefly saw earlier in the season, and I kind of forgot he was still around, but he's shooting a documentary
Beto.
apparently. Yeah, Beto Ortegas instead of Erica Ortegas. So they go in, and it turns out that it's like a dungeon crawl where not everything is as it appears, and there are no monsters that you expect, but weird things happen. And not only do they need to figure out how to escape this tomb, which is really what it is, but also they accidentally send back one of the tomb's monsters to the Enterprise, and hilarity ensues.
Indeed, it does.
Yeah.
I had a question for you, actually. So how long has Gamble been on Enterprise? Because when he started his personal log narration exposition over uh, voiceover, he talks about it being the 6 months since he had been assigned to the ship. Does that mean there's 6 months between the last episode that we watched and this one? Because I think he showed up in the last episode for the first time.
He first showed up in the first episode of the season.
Oh, way back then. Okay.
Yeah, or maybe the second. So after they escaped the war with the Gorn, they went back to Earth to repair their ship because it had taken so much damage. They went back to space dock, and in that episode, they brought on Gamble, who was temporary because so many people had been hurt during the war with the Gorn, and Mbenga decided to make his transfer permanent. So he showed up in season 3, episode 2. This is season 3, episode 5. So it did occur to me that that means that there's like basically 6 weeks between every episode this season, if it's been 6 months since he came aboard.
Yeah, yeah. It seemed like a big jump, especially because one of the first things we see is the Tell getting treatments in sick bay, uh, and Benga talks about Gamble talks about like how well she's doing, and like it's a modern miracle and things with the treatments that she's been getting, and it seemed a little bit odd to jump from what we previously knew about her Gorn infestation, whatever you want to call it, and where we are now. So that just kind of stood out for me. And I wasn't clear if that was like since last episode or if I missed something. And Google lied to me, so I'll blame Google for telling me it was the previous episode. And then we have that really weird scene with Chapel and La'an in the hallway where she's checking on Spock, I guess, but it's La'an's clearly uncomfortable with this, and then they get in the elevator and things just get so much worse. Or Chapel gets on the elevator and Spock is in there, and this is the first time I've really seen Spock do this, and he did it a couple of times in the episode where he is addressed directly and does not respond at all. She gets in and says, Spock, and he does kind of nod a little bit, and then there's a scene later in the mission briefing where they're talking, and she says something to him, and he just turns his head back and doesn't say anything. And I thought that kind of stood out as a weird character thing for him.
I think he was perhaps either giving her the cold shoulder or just not knowing how to respond, because I know I've been in situations where I'm afraid that either I'm going to say the wrong thing or whatever I say will be taken the wrong way. And so sometimes it's just
Absolutely.
better, like if you are anxious or nervous or afraid, better to just say or do nothing. And given their
Agreed.
history as a couple, maybe that's the situation here.
Yeah, it seemed a very emotional moment for Spock, and I really kind of enjoy the way this show is taking time to point out his human side a lot more than the other iterations of Spock that we've seen. And this was one of those times where he was clearly uncomfortable. And then it got even worse when Gamble gets on the elevator and stands between them, and they don't move to make space for him. And this is big, a lot of space in the lift, and nobody moves. And he's like, "I got in the middle of something, didn't I?" And that made me laugh. So to me, this episode turns out to be kind of it's I think a horror genre. A lot of it felt like that to me. There were a lot of nods to certain horror franchises. I tend to pick this apart, and it may sound like I don't like this episode, but I actually really do. So we start out with the macaroons, or I'm sorry, the macaroons,
Did you do that on purpose?
I did. Yes, that was
I
on
love
purpose,
that.
of course. I mean, and who apparently have not been interested in Federation membership. But now that the Federation, and I'm not really sure what is happening here to get them on. Why is the Federation investing? I know that they want that Corby wants into that little cave that they find. And the macaroon that accompanies them doesn't really say much. Um, it just seems to sort of be standing there because he's going to die later on. Spoiler alert, folks. So that was kind of a strange thing to me. And what do I have here in my notes? We have some fun on the surface of the planet. We have some fun flirting between Beto and Ahura, and apparently his little camera drone turns out to be a bit of a auteur director that seeks for the hot action, or I forget the word specifically that they used, but that was kind of fun. I enjoyed that. And we learned that there's some sort of advanced technology hiding beneath us, and they set up their little sticks in the ground, and Enterprise does its technology thing, and the beams come down, and I got a very reminiscent feeling of what Data did in Insurrection, to reveal the hidden uh, edifice behind some sort of invisibility shielding. To me, this felt very much like a sort of an updated version of, and I'm sure I'll mispronounce this, but the Al-Khosneh, the artifice in Petra, the
So,
city in the Middle East.
so Petra being where the third Indiana Jones film was shot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
And well, I think a lot of films have actually shot stuff in and around that. That particular the edifice that appeared in Indiana Jones and the other movies, I think, was actually like the entrance to the city's treasury. There's a lot more in that area than just that. And I think El Khasna is actually the treasury is what it stands for. And then we get a Jaws reference. Captain, we're going to need a bigger landing party, which I thought was a lot of fun. I was like, oh, okay, I see where we're going here. And from here, it to me felt like, I don't know, I'm old enough to remember early PC gaming. And so, well, by late 90s, they had this kind of newish thing that they were doing with games. It was before there was really a gaming industry, and so these games didn't catch on and ended up being very expensive. But they were called full motion video adventure games, things like Phantasmagoria and Ripper, and there were a few other ones where um, um, it's a point and click adventure with a lot of motion capture and pre-recorded video stuff. And this game felt a lot like that. I even said this episode felt a lot like that, where it became kind of a insert key A into lock B, and you in your dimension turn it, and what happens? I will say Gamble, very stupid, got his eyes fried out. He picked up this. Why would you touch that? Why are you touching this?
In his defense, this is his first away mission, and he had just seen somebody else on the away mission, somebody he admired, open that tomb or whatever and take out a book or a slate or something. So he's like,
Yes,
"Oh,
but
it's okay to pick up things in this tomb. He did it. I'll do it too."
yes, but the book that Chapel picked up didn't immediately start glowing and floating, and I would, so like I wasn't, I didn't feel that bad for him when he got his eyes burned out.
That is a
I,
noticeable difference, between a book and a glowing floating orb.
well, and later on in the episode, Spock kind of does the same thing. There's a dead body on the floor, and he pulls the eyepiece off of it and just starts looking through it. Like, what are you doing?
I thought that was so foolish. I was waiting to see that turn against him.
Well, and now granted, the eyepiece was on one of the dead grave robbers, so it wasn't technology that was actually in the structure to begin with, whereas these little floaty grenade things were. Maybe that's why he felt more comfortable. That seems very, very dumb, especially considering what you just witnessed happen. There are a few logic problems like that throughout, but like I said, I love this episode, and so I tend to be a lot more forgiving for stuff. and then we had the credit sequence at like 11 and a half minutes in, which I think is a lot later than most of the opening. You get the little opening swoosh and the notes from the theme, but the credits, where you have Pike doing the Final Frontier thing was like very late in the episode. Something that I happened to notice, and it seemed like they solved a lot of problems very easily. Here they figured out the language, like Aurora figured out the language basically in the time it took everybody else to sort of exposit what was happening about these access plates and the stuff that they found on other planets, hundreds of light years away, which again feels more like a point and click computer game solution. And then when they got inside, it sort of felt for me was very reminiscent of the puzzle boxes in the Hellraiser series. And they worked a little bit different in that in that one, when the puzzle box kind of tried to tempt you and entice you to open it, and when you did, you got sucked into this dimension and then pulled apart by chains, basically, in these different dimensions of hell. But this thing, it turns out, it sort of enticed them to walk in, and then they found themselves kind of in this weird I think Spock called it layered dimensions or something like that, where they're all in the same room, but they think they're in different rooms because they can't see each other. And somehow their comms work through these dimensions somehow. So I don't know. I still want to give them the credit, the benefit of the doubt here, because a lot of it feels like this could be, and I really hope it's not. A lot of this feels like it could be shortcuts for lazy writing. I prefer to think that this is smart writing with a lot of references to stuff. And I know I'm talking a lot. Ken, what do you think?
Well, how quickly or did you figure out that they were all in the same room, just out of phase?
Did I?
So like there comes a point in the episode where they reveal that to us through Beto's camera, which is somehow smarter than any of the other technology they have available with them. I didn't see that coming. In hindsight, maybe I should have, but I can imagine that somebody might have picked it up faster than I did.
No, I didn't really. I didn't see that happening. I was mostly kind of looking at. So when they step in and somebody does something stupid and they get locked in, of course, and then the rest of the place kind of lights up around them, and you see that they're not just standing in this small dark room, but these big corridors of light that go way back, and you can see in the background that like the actual architecture is moving back and forth and rearranging itself. And I thought, like, this seemed like some really cool opportunities here that just kind of got, I don't know, dropped. And maybe it was because, well, I'm sure it was because, they had this other storyline once they took Gamble back up to the ship. And what else did I have here?
One thing I noticed is that when they were having this big moment where they were trying to decide, should we continue with this mission even though there's a clear threat risk, or do we go back to the ship?
Yeah.
And that was an internal debate, and eventually Spock decided to trust everybody and keep going. And my thought was, this is one time when I think it would be okay to split the party. Like, send somebody back up to the ship, explain what's going on, while the rest of the people continue to investigate. You don't need all 6 people present, or at that moment, 7. Like, it's okay to just have 4 people, like have Roger there, have him do the investigation. This is his dig. Why does everybody else need to stick around? So I think they could have made, I don't think it was an either or decision. That's a very common storytelling technique, especially when there's a villain present. So like the villain might say, you can save your girlfriend or this puppy. You have to decide. And all of a sudden the hero, that's actually a very specific technique that the villain is using. It's not that he's actually threatening these two things. He's, by framing it that way, he's forcing the hero into this box where he thinks he has to decide. And in actuality, he doesn't. He can choose both. And a great example of this is the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, where Green Goblin is holding a trolley full of New Yorkers and MJ, and he drops both. And Peter finds a way to save both because he did not allow himself to be forced into binary thinking. And in this case, I feel like seven of Starfleet's finest allowed themselves to be put into binary thinking that they had to either continue with the dig or go back to the ship, when the answer is both.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't go there at all. And in my head, it felt like this was kind of an opportunity to explore more of the interplay again between Corby and Spock and how they were feeling about Chapel, and kind of like I'll assert my dominance thing, because when Spock makes a suggestion to go outside, report it, go back to the ship, Corby immediately says, "You're not in charge here." And it took I think La'an to say like, "Oh yes, he is," and then there was this kind of back and forth thing to, I don't know, press Chapel or something. That's what that felt like to me. And of course, eventually they decided, that I love when Corby said, "I am not beholden to Star Trek or to Star Trek to Starfleet," but he used their ship to get there. He's working with Chapel and all of their people. So I would say that sort of you are, at least for right now.
Yeah, I think the response to that is if you're not beholden to us, then we don't owe you a ride home. So bye.
Exactly. Yeah, although he did try to stay down there at first, when they all wanted to leave. He's like, me and the Macroon are going to stay. They talked him out of it. There were some interesting moments. I really love this. So they're still jumping back a minute. They're still standing outside the entrance to this place, trying to figure out how to get in. And they start exchanging quips about how they've, read like blood sacrifice and, sacrifice to stand before the gods and this and that. And Corby just whips out a knife, just like, "I'm going to cut my hand." And Chapel has to step in and say, calm down just a minute. And she ended up sticking her finger and getting it stuck there and then dripping the blood in. She literally got stuck on top, turned it over, and then dripped the blood down. So whatever stuck her couldn't take the blood as well, I guess. I don't know. Maybe they just wanted the blood effect. I thought that was kind of funny. The entrance to the thing sort of felt a little bit like the Lord of the Rings, where they're standing outside trying to figure out how to get into. Just drew a blank on the name of the dwarves.
Moira? Mines of Moria?
Moria, yeah.
Moria, that's it.
And that kind of that seems to be sort of a fantasy
Trope?
Yes, that seems to be kind of a fantasy trope as well. Kind of like this. What's the open sesame to get into this vault of treasure? And there's a scene like so. The Macroon only says a couple of things. Outside, he talks about the gods, and then like the next scene, he's speaking Macroonian. Like, come on, you can't come up with a better name for the language than that. But in my head, I was just like, he was just speaking perfect English. I don't know why we switched back. And then, like a few minutes later, he decides he's seen something evil, and they're going to all die, and runs for the door, and he dies. He gets zapped. And this apparently tells Spock that they have to leave and go back and forth in a specific order, which felt a little odd because when they took Gamble out, there was no order. It was just her and La'an took Gamble out and then came back in. They didn't have to go all in a group and all in the same order, but they did when they went into the dark doorway. It's kind of what I called that.
Well, what got me about that security measure was that it scans the initial person, which is Nurse Chapel, and apparently anybody who is with her is okay to come and go. But if whoever designed this safety measure, the security system, knew what it was that they were trying to prevent from leaving, then they should have known that this non-corporeal entity is able to possess people. So what does it matter if you're with somebody or not? Like, okay, you're in Nurse Chapel's party. That means you're safe whether or not you're possessed. That's not effective at what they were trying to do.
Agreed. Yeah, there were some weird decisions in the plotting here. And I took to referring to that little floaty grenade thing that Gamble picked up as the portable enticement snare. Which, if you're a fan of the Mystery Men movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a great scene in that. That's another like really bad movie that I just absolutely love. And they're finding like oops, hang on. Ultimately, they decide the rest of them being there once they get split up is just about getting back together and then putting the key in the slot to open the door to leave. And then that's kind of the end of that storyline. It doesn't really go into, at least for this episode. It feels like maybe they could be doing something else with this in the future, because you see you see a scene where Spock dumbly puts on those eyeglasses and looks down into this like well, and there's thousands of those little things that zapped Gamble's eyes away. And when back up on the ship, that there's an interchange that we'll talk about here in just a minute. But first, we get on the ship. Gamble is wearing this, and when I saw this. They put this eye thing on him, this like a shield or something. When I saw it, my brain immediately locked onto like that scene in Johnny Mnemonic where Keanu puts his like cyber glass thing on, and then every time they showed Gamble wearing it, that's all my head went to, was Keanu like being a terrible actor in that movie. But apparently that's supposed to regrow his eyeballs. And I guess, well, here's the thing. Like, I guess if you're in a situation where you have technology that can just regrow your eyes, the stakes are kind of low. Just sure, go ahead, pick up a grenade. We'll replace it. But it doesn't. And when Mbenga scans him, his brain comes back as dead, like completely no activity. He's not dead, but apparently his brain is no longer functioning, which should have been kind of a warning for what's about to come, because we get kind of an exorcist thing that happens next, where some weird demon inside or something inside starts talking to Mbenga and taunting him about people that he knows. And later we even get the reference to, I know your mother, kind of a thing, which the demon in The Exorcist did when Regan was tied to the bed, and the demon was taunting the priest about his mother being in hell. And I really kind of enjoyed that sort of interplay, and especially how Gamble played that. That was a lot of fun to watch. And so for me, while this was all very highly derivative, I kind of paused here to these are my impressions so far. Highly derivative, and there were a lot of I couldn't tell if this was supposed to be satire or not. But like I said earlier, I think I want to believe that it's cool and smart, rather than just unintentional lazy writing, because it could be either. It does seem like they're setting up a whole lot for what's coming, because when Batel comes down for treatment, whatever is in Batel recognizes whatever is in Gamble. And they're like, they throw down immediately, time to kill you kind of a thing. And I think they sort of imply that Gamble was already actually gone at that point. This was all just the demon. But whatever was in Batel, being the Gorn, there was like, we got to fight every time we see each other kind of a deal happening. And later on, when Scotty uses the transporter to put that thing in Gamble into their transporter pattern buffer, it seems like, okay, we've set this up to make a really effective weapon against the Gorn at some point. And at the very end of that part, of course, we get this little like staticky thing to show that like the transporter buffer is not containing this thing like you think it is. So there's that as well. And I think that's what I've got, without like really going just on and on more than I already have.
Which did you think was the more interesting half of this episode? What was on the planet, or what was happening on the ship?
The planet at first was more interesting, but it sort of felt like they didn't know where to go with it, or decided to address some of the stuff later on. Especially, there was a weird shot where like I couldn't even tell. So when Chapel opens that thing and picks up that plate and the grenade is under it, we don't even get a clear shot of what that is that she opens, because like the camera angle is sort of like behind a dead body, and it seems like maybe okay, they cut some scenes out to save time, and it began to all feel like that. There was a lot of shortcutting and stuff that cool ideas that were solved way too easily, and that's when it started to feel like that point and click adventure game. The Seventh Guest and stuff like that. That was one that stood out in my mind immediately when I saw some of this. I think I enjoyed the kind of super horror stuff that happened on the ship. With they kept showing his eyes, which I loved that because that effect was pretty cool. I don't know. It felt like maybe this could have been better as 2 episodes. Um, but they definitely did this thing again and I've seen this a lot in this show, especially where we will make extra storylines by splitting up the cast, the crew members, 3 of them over here, 2 of them over here. And in the end, we hear like why, like what we did over here helped what we did over there. And I don't know, that feels like kind of a trope that they're leaning on a lot. It still works for me though. I do think the part up on the ship could have been expanded more. Again, it felt very short. The scenes with Mbenga and Gamble especially could have been built out a little bit, but I don't know. This to me was a very satisfying episode. I watched it several times because it aired, a week and a half ago or 2 weeks now, something like that. And I've had plenty of time to sit with it in my head and think about a lot of this stuff. And yeah, I've rewatched it beginning to end a few times, and I usually am not able to really do that. Like I'll watch it once, and then if I have ideas or thoughts about something, I'll find the specific section that I'm looking for. But I liked this episode a whole lot.
Cool.
Yeah. How did you feel about it?
There were I had a lot of thoughts about some of the stuff that was going on. So some of the things you brought up was the technology to regenerate a person's eyes. And this episode taking place during the TOS era, whereas in season 1 of TNG, Crusher said there was nothing she could do to repair Geordi's eyes. And then in the very next season, Pulaski said, "Oh, sure, I can regrow your eyes." And then finally in the movies, he gets his eyes regrown. I was like, so did that technology just get forgotten for season 1 of TNG? And I know that trying to, there are over 900 episodes of Star Trek. You can't make them all consistent. I get
Sure.
that. But yeah, the whole Gamble possession storyline was very interesting. Just the us slowly coming to realize, as you said, that Gamble was already gone and that he was never there. And just the extent of this creature's abilities, like you mentioned knowing the security guard's mother was in pain. And how did it know that? Its ability to walk through force fields. I've only ever seen Jem'Hadar do that. What is its correlation with the Gorn? I've read fantasy novels like that where somebody walks into the room and they recognize that somebody else is possessed because they're actually ancient foes. I love that idea and I don't get to see it often in television, and there's so much history behind that. I would like to know how Scotty repaired that glass bubble that he captured the enemy in, because it exploded. And I do know that they brought it back up to the ship, but I didn't realize that he had repaired it to the point where he could capture the thing again. But yeah, the whole, not, I mean, and also, so Gamble appeared in maybe 3 episodes this season before dying, and we got to know a little bit about him. We got to hear his own logs, stuff like that. Contrast that with season 2 of Discovery, which if you haven't seen yet, fast forward this podcast 30 seconds, because here's a spoiler. The character of Ariam died. And we didn't get her backstory until the episode where she died. So this time we get to actually know the character a little bit more than that, as more than just background dressing or some character walking by on the bridge. So I'm surprised that Gamble died so early in the season and even in the series, but I'm also glad that we got to see him and talk to him and hear from him multiple times before he died. So that feels like a progression, an evolution from how Star Trek was treating deaths just a few years ago.
Interesting. You say these things, and it brings up some thoughts in my mind as well. The Geordi eye thing, that's kind of what occurred to me. Although what occurred to me was I remember early episodes where somebody asked him about, like, why don't you get them repaired? And he's like, no, I like this. I like being able to see this fly. I had forgotten about like where Pulaski later goes, yeah, we can fix this, no problem. Um, there was a funny moment back down on the planet. So they're scanning, talking about being not there or whatever. They're scanning this, like, I don't know, sculpture or whatever. It's La'an and Chapel's like scanning it, and she says it's alive, or it has life. And immediately La'an pulls her face and then sort of stands there like, doesn't really know what to do with it, and then just puts it away. When I think when they figured out that it's not like a sentient kind of life, it's a different sort of, it's an organic organism, but not necessarily like an evil thing in of itself. I thought that was kind of funny. I do wonder if we're going to see more of Gamble as whatever this entity is when it decides to manifest itself again. Maybe I don't know, could be a cool opportunity to bring him back and play whatever this entity is. It did sort of occur to me, like you said, if it's walking through force shields like that, like it's nothing, why does it need a phaser to try and make them give give it the codes to take over the ship from engineering? And it seems like it I don't know, there were just a lot of the logic there didn't really make sense to me. But then again, a lot of the horror genre kind of relies on like sacrificing logic to tell a better story. And so maybe that's what that was. I don't know. I look forward to whatever happens there.
I'm not a huge fan of the Ghost in the Machine idea. I feel like we kind of saw that already in season 2 of Discovery with Control. But if it is something that they're going to bring back later, I hope it's resolved this season. One last thing I want to mention before we move on to the next episode of Star Trek is one of the reasons I brought up when you mentioned Petra and I mentioned Indiana Jones 3, that came back later at the end of the episode when all of a sudden they introduced this idea of effect can precede cause, and they have to walk across this invisible bridge just like Indiana Jones did. I didn't understand why they couldn't just like tap their toe out to see if the bridge was there. They had to take a leap of faith. And this is also something I've mentioned before on this podcast. I feel like this season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is trying to do too much in each episode, because you could do a whole episode just about the idea of cause and effect being reversed. And instead, it's this thing they bring in at the last moment for this one gimmick of the bridge. And I was like, it's too late in the episode. Don't do that. Just like bring it in early, or don't bring it in at all.
I did love that reference. I thought that was, that was fun to like, oh, look, the invisible bridge thing. But there was a line a little bit earlier when they were deciding, like, okay, we have to leave, where Apple basically goes, oh, wow, like, okay, this is some really cool technology. Gotta go. See you, and yeah, I think I came away from this episode, if there was a criticism for me, it was just that each one of those could have been a really great standalone episode. We didn't need to force all of that into one. And that, I think, brings us to all the stuff that they do force into this next episode.
The next episode. So shall we go ahead and talk about season 3, episode 6, the Sehlat who ate its tail?
I think we should.
Okay. The TLDR on this episode is that the Farragut, which is where James T. Kirk is number 1 or commander or second in command, has just witnessed a planet explode, and the enemy that made it happen is still in orbit. The Farragut is greatly damaged. They put out a distress signal, and who should respond but the Enterprise? So they show up. They do a little bit of a crew swapping to make sure that everybody's where they need to be for the plot. And then the Enterprise gets captured by this giant ship that is bigger than anything we've ever seen, maybe even bigger than a Borg cube. I don't know. And the damaged Farragut has to go save it, with Captain Kirk, who is now acting captain, having, for the first time in his Starfleet career, to make some difficult decisions. So we get to see a proto-Kirk become who we know he will be. So that is this episode in a nutshell.
Yeah, there was some beautiful foreshadowing of things that were going to come all throughout this thing. I talked earlier and kind of the references to all the other sci-fi and fantasy and horror franchises out there. And this one is a lot more um, sort of rewarding longtime fans of Trek that have been watching the series and the movies and things like that. For me, because you finally sort of get like, this is the first time that this Kirk felt like Kirk to me. It starts off with him talking about how bored he was, and, when they were at this planet, and they were scanning it, and he's like, it could be a lot more interesting if we get closer to scan it. And she's like, what do you mean? Like boots on the ground. He wants to go do things. He's bored. That feels like the adventuresome Kirk that we knew.
And his line about the fact that we can be down there, feet on the ground, and this is why Starfleet sent us out here instead of a probe, mirrors almost exactly something that Captain Archer said to T'Pol way back in Enterprise.
I enjoyed, especially a little bit later in the episode, where you have Spock, Papel, Uhura, and Scotty discussing the differences in command style that Kirk has from Pike, and you can see how they're used to the way Pike would just ask them, like, "What do you think we should do? What do you think we should do? What do you?" And deciding something where Kirk was a lot more just emotional and seat of the pants. And at the end, he kind of calmed down a little bit and began to ask what people thought. But it was a very different command style, and one that, again, felt a lot more like the Shatner Kirk that was, that would come later. Very kind of emotional and going with his feelings, and sometimes, making snap decisions, and sometimes they were right, sometimes they were wrong, but he stood by them because that was his decision. And watching them I think there was even a moment where they were like, should we just like take over? We could just put Spock in charge. And fortunately, I think Spock kind of, said no. And the introduction of the Borg, what the proto-Borg, I guess you would say, very much. The other part of this episode for me was fascinating to watch.
Well, are you drawing an actual correlation between this episode and the Borg?
Yeah.
You think these were Borg?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. This planet splits apart, and there's like some gravitational beam that basically rips it apart. And I'm sorry, the thing that the ship had like a snapping turtle head with weird teeth, and to me looked kind of like a bit of a Gamera kaiju. So I kind of enjoyed that, but they keep talking. They didn't use the word assimilate, but they kept talking throughout the episode about how they would absorb other technologies, and there didn't seem to be any reason for it. They just just made it a part of themselves. And you had the sequences where they would shoot one of them and kill it, and then fire at the next one, and it would have no effect because these, they were adapting. To me, this felt exactly like we didn't actually see, like, I guess what we would later come to understand as assimilation, the way it showed up in Next Generation. But to me, this felt very much like these are the Borg.
I didn't see that happening, them adapting. Each suit of armor had like an energy absorption cell, and you could see the energy being drawn into that. And once the Starfleet crewmen damaged that cell, then they were able to take damage. We didn't see anything robotic about the people under the armor. I don't know. I don't think these are Borg.
Interesting, because and you're right as far as that little power thing goes. I think this is maybe an early version of the Borg before they start, because they evolve over time, and we go from them being in these suits, and I guess they were all humans. And later, my guess would be that there was some evolution there between what we were seeing and the Borg that would eventually integrate the literal like base plates and weird hoses and things like that into the skin. To me, yeah, I thought that's what this was.
Interesting. That's not a take that had occurred to me.
Hmm.
So, but we did get to see a lot of, as you said, command styles. You talked about how Pike solicits people's opinions, and Kirk, we saw him actually isolate himself. He said, like, what I need is to be able to think, and I can't think with all you people talking here. And we
Yeah.
saw, even with William Shatner's Kirk, he talked about the isolating burden of command. And, we start to see that here. What I do wonder is, do you think the Kirk that we saw in this episode is the same Kirk that we know was the first person to ever beat the Kobayashi Maru?
Um, well, if you'd asked me that question before this episode, I would have said no. But this feels a lot more like a Kirk that would do something like that, where like the rules don't necessarily matter if I know how to get to the goal that I'm trying to reach. Um, and I'm willing to cheat, I guess you would call it, whereas he would call it exploiting a loophole. That felt a lot more realistic to me. And I just enjoyed seeing like kind of the collection of um, the original series crew come together. It obviously we're not to the point yet where they're going to be as they are in the Enterprise later on, but we get little glimpses of that, where Kirk is talking to Spock and Uhura and Scotty, and we start to see Scotty talking to the ship the way he talked to, Enterprise later on, and interacting, and Kirk asking him to do the impossible, and Spock and Scotty like, okay, I'll do it, kind of the thing. And I really, really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like a lot of we do start to see the genesis of that, and we also see that these characters do need to grow, and not only in how they interact with each other, but also in their own place on the crew. For example, you and I talked about in a previous podcast episode whether or not Erica Ortegas was being disrespectful during one of those roundtable meetings. I felt like in the very first scene when Kirk was questioning his captain's orders about whether or not to go down to the planet, and he was doing that in front of everybody on the bridge, that's not really something a commander should do when an order has already been given. And also, Scotty, he had some very valid complaints and concerns that Kirk chose to ignore, eventually to his detriment. But I think the way Scotty expressed those opinions was also not in keeping with the chain of command in Starfleet. And I think we'll see that as these people start to work together and respect each other and understand each other's strengths, we'll see that diminish. But this early on in their relationship, it is reasonable. I'm not objecting to what we saw, but the way Scotty was behaving, I was like, wow, this guy, this kid really has a lot of growing up still to do.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely some, maturity that's missing there. And they said that this was like only Kirk's first time in the chair, kind of a thing. And and somebody else pointed out that yeah, it always takes adjustment. And they did a very good job, I think, of portraying that. But yeah, you mentioned the Shatner Kirk talking about the isolation command, and very much, I think, gosh, what was it? Was it the first Star Trek movie where he shows up and is just like I'm taking the Enterprise. Sorry to what's his name? Who is the one that fell in love with Ilea?
Decker?
Decker was going to get the Enterprise, I think, and Kirk showed up and said, "Nope, it's me." Very much this kind of, I make my decisions, and while I appreciate the input, my decision is my decision. Where Pike seems a lot more like, not that he's not in command, but he relies on his crew a lot more to provide necessary input for his decisions. And Kirk kind of just like takes whatever is available and then fills the rest in on his own. And I I thought the effects in this episode were wonderful. It was really a lot of fun. Okay, I don't like um, Carol Kane's character at all
You mentioned that,
in
yeah.
this.
I do feel in the previous episode that we just saw, I felt like she was really over the top and dramatic. But then we learned that she's doing that specifically because Beto is filming her. So I was like, I can give her a
Indeed.
pass. I don't like what she did, but I understand why she did it. In this episode,
Yeah,
what did you think?
I agree. I much it her standing with me didn't really improve, but I didn't lose that much either because, frankly, if I were in that situation, the vintage collector in me, my room would look exactly like hers. And okay, the telephone thing. This is one of those situations where like they sacrificed a lot of like reality to make something fun work. She's got all of these old rotary dial phones in her collection, and they strip out. The idea is they want to rewire the ship to use these phones to talk to each other because the comms are down. And they strip out way more copper than could have been in the 3 or 4 phones that she pulled out. I mean, maybe she had a whole closet or something, but and then when I think it was when I picked up one of the phones and there's a dial tone, no, but it was kind of funny watching them, watching the actors play act with this fun prop that they'd been given and pretending that they didn't know what a phone was. And
I loved the phone. That was my favorite part of this episode.
yeah,
I do need to quote this one Reddit comment from somebody named Gentleman Octopus, who says,
okay,
Pelia is like a level 20 D&D character with a bag of holding who picked up a bunch of junk and never used any of it. I'm
yep,
like, yes, that is perfect. I mean, she pulled out the phones. I think she pulled out an Atari 2600 and implied that they
she
used
did.
to pilot ships with that just for fun, which
Yeah,
reminded me of Star Trek Insurrection when there was a manual control column that Riker used to pilot the Enterprise, which was just a joystick, like a flight stick.
that even happened in this episode. They used a couple of these weren't Atari joysticks, but they were joysticks of hers. Um, you know that Ortega's could not fly the ship from the helm because of the damage. She was on the phone giving instructions on the adjustments that needed to be made to the thrusters,
Correct.
and they were doing that with these, game sticks, basically.
Yep. Yeah, as you mentioned with Una and the dial tone, I loved that. She picked up, she's like, what is happening? And just like Erica being on the phone on at the front of the ship while piloting, as you just described, it just felt very much like I don't know if a submarine is the right analogy because submarine episodes, which we have seen all the way back to TOS with Balance of Terror, are usually very tense. But just the idea that like the captain of the ship isn't the one steering the ship. And in this case, Ortega's like, America Ortegas, I fly the ship, but I need to be the eyes telling somebody else what to do to fly the ship. It just felt very much more akin to how we have piloted things in the last 100 years, as opposed to futuristic, which didn't Pelia say, times like this make me glad I lived through the 1980s?
I thought she said that something about reminding me how much she didn't like living through the 80s.
But it was
Maybe
the
I
80s.
misheard
That was
that.
the decade, right?
That was the 80s. Yeah, that
Okay.
was the reference that she made. And I really liked, you walk into a room and it's like this museum to junk pop culture of the 70s, 80s and 90s. And I loved that like there was an
Jukebox.
Andy Warhol of her, the 4-color painting, but it's the Pelia with her that smile that she does.
Didn't even notice that.
Um, yeah, that and the background stuff that just made me smile so much. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I kind of get where they're going here. That I wish Carol. I don't know. I think I just don't understand that accent that she does. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
And I would probably be a lot more okay with this character if it wasn't so weird and over the top. Because I do see like a purpose for Pelia being there, and they've done a good job of presenting that. I just don't like the choices that she's making with this.
The reason I asked about the decade is because I feel like a lot of the technology in her room and which she pulled out for this episode predates the 80s. Like those rotary phones, those, I mean,
Oh
we
yeah.
had touch phones by the 80s. So I felt like this was more like 60s and 70s stuff.
I do as well, but she also said she was over 5,000 years old, and probably, I would say maybe her memory works differently, but my guess would be that certain periods kind of just run together a little bit after a while.
Is that how old she is? 8,000? 5,000? Oh, you're right.
5,000.
You are absolutely
Yeah.
correct. In this episode, she said 5,000 years. I didn't realize I would have pegged her at 1,000, but okay.
Yeah,
Wow,
I seem to recall they're saying her being a few hundred in a different episode,
well, clearly she moisturizes.
but
Yeah.
yeah, all credit to her for her skincare routine. It's
Yeah.
on point.
And when you talk about them going into her quarters, I think that's the first scene in this episode where Mbenga shows up. And I was kind of like, oh, he's in
Okay.
this episode. Okay. If he was in a previous scene, I overlooked it, but I felt like he just all of a sudden was part of the party. And I was like, oh, kind of late in the episode for you to be showing up, but all right.
I think I've noticed that, and I didn't catch that in this one, but there have been a couple of episodes where like certain crew members just like haven't been there, or had like two lines or something. And I do wish the show would like do a better job of either explaining that or maybe integrating them a little bit better. They don't necessarily need to have like a critical plot role, but they just disappear sometimes. And I don't know if that's because the writers just don't know what to do with them, or I don't know. It feels a little bit incongruous to me.
I've probably shared this anecdote on some podcast before, but there was an episode of Days of Our Lives, the soap opera, back in the 60s or 70s, where a bunch of characters are sitting around the house and somebody says like, "Oh, where's this thing?" And one of the characters says, "Oh, it's up in the attic. I'll go get it." And you can see her going up the stairs to get it. That's the last we ever saw of that character. Like that's how they wrote that character off. Character goes up into the attic, is never seen or mentioned again.
Is that a throwback to the Happy Days character?
I don't know which Happy Days character that is.
So Richie Cunningham originally had a brother, an older brother in the early days of Happy Days, and he's written out of the show. He goes up the stairs one night for something, and he's never mentioned again or seen on the show. I wonder if that's a reference back to that.
I don't know. Let me see. I'm checking Wikipedia here. Chuck Cunningham, I think, is his brother.
Yes, yeah,
Uh,
that's him.
oh yeah, the character's disappearance gave rise to the term Chuck Cunningham syndrome, used to describe TV characters that disappear from shows without an in-narrative explanation and are nowhere to be seen or mentioned again. Huh. I didn't know that there was a precedent for that. I don't think Days of Our Lives did it intentionally to reference Happy Days, even though they both have days in their title. Maybe it's like Happy Days of Our Lives.
There you go.
But there is
Well,
sort of this
I don't.
this fan theory that eventually, as all shows do, Days of Our Lives will come to an end, and it would be very
Mhm.
funny if the final scene is like everybody in that same house, and they're moving out and they're selling the house, and that's how the show ends. Is like they're moving on. They're like, well, this has been a good house for many decades. We're gonna miss it, and then they turn off the lights, they leave the door, the camera stays on the dark room and the person comes down from the attic and says, "Found it," and that's the last scene.
That's funny. The only reason that I immediately thought of the Happy Days connection was because you mentioned him walking up the stairs and never being seen again, which is exactly how they got rid of Chuck.
Poor Chuck. He deserved a better fate.
He did, I agree. And I don't even remember anything about him. Just that that's how he disappeared.
Hmm. Two more things I want to say about this episode. One is that it had a good balance of, although it was a very tense episode, there were also the occasional moments of levity. For example, Spock saying to Kirk, "I promise to demote you at the earliest opportunity." I just love that little aside. But also, not just the levity, but the final scene when everything is finally resolved and you have Pike and Kirk in the quarters alone, and Kirk is still acting captain. So they're just talking captain to captain, and Kirk is being like, I don't know if I might made the right decision. I don't know that I should have seen them as the enemy instead of 7,000 humans. And Pike is like, well, sometimes you don't make the right decision, and sometimes it lives with you, and this is what you learn from this episode, and this is what you will carry with you, and that becomes part of who you are as a captain. And I loved that scene so much because it was these overall Strange New Worlds is more often funny than we expect from Star Trek. Like it has a musical episode, it has a Lower Decks crossover. But this is just like, in a way, an intimate moment between two people who, one of whom is well acquainted with the burden of command and also what it means for his own fate, and one person whose fate we know. Pike knows his fate. Pike knows his own fate. But you and I, we know Kirk's fate. And so we're coming at this from like Kirk, Pike, and the audience are all coming at this from very different angles with very different notions and awareness. And the way those all interplayed here, and we got to see the future happening in that moment. And I just think it's so fascinating also that Pike was a character who was in a failed pilot back in 1966. And he wasn't even canon until he got written back in as a flashback. And now we have a whole series based on him. And I can't help but think what Gene Roddenberry would think to know that his original vision has come to life. And we get to see how that vision ties into this whole legacy of Kirk and the Enterprise and everything that it spawned and everything that came after it. And I just feel like that one moment in the quarters with the chair tipped over was just a crystallization of that. I loved it.
I agree, 100%. I really, that scene between Pike and Kirk felt very much, I don't know if father-son really is, but like cool, cool older uncle giving some advice to a young man who has his future ahead of him and maybe struggling a little bit. And watching him not only give that, but seeing the way that Kirk received it, in such an open manner, because we know later on that Kirk was not someone who took advice all the time from people. And he did. There were plenty of times, I think, when he questioned his own decisions later on. But just watching the way Pike handled that scene was very touching. I enjoyed that a lot, and like you said, I've thought a lot about that first, the TOS episode and how it started out as that pilot that was with Pike and then refigured to exclude him, basically, and how far we've come, and what a rich storytelling texture and a canvas we've gotten from that. And this is one of the reasons that for its faults and flaws, I really, really enjoy Strange New Worlds. And even though that, I'm even having fun picking them apart because I like it, not because I'm just like, oh God, more of this crap. This continues to be a great thing, and I look forward to everything that's coming.
And for all those reasons and more, I think this is my favorite episode of the season so far.
I agree.
Yeah.
I liked the previous one a little bit more just because I'm a big horror fan and it was fun to see all those connections. But yeah, this is slightly below that one for me.
There is one other thing we learned about the future of humanity in this episode, which is very important. At one point, Kirk refers to the damaged Farragut as being held together by duct tape. Duct tape still exists in the future.
I love that.
I don't know if we knew that, but now we do, and this is important. Maybe they even have WD-40.
Oh, which reminds me, I wanted to mention one other thing real quick that I'd forgotten to, and that was just I thought it was really cool watching them sort of eject the warp nacelles and use those as decoys to get away from those claw things, which ended up being how they ate its own tail.
I didn't even know that nacelles were ejectable.
Me either. That was great. I love it.
Yeah. So those are the latest 2 episodes. We're more than halfway through this season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We have 2 more episodes of this podcast still to come, 2 weeks from now and then 4 weeks from now. Until next time.
Never give up, never surrender, damn the resonance cannons, and full speed ahead.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and keep your hailing frequencies open by following us on Twitter @TransporterLock or subscribing to our podcast and email newsletter at transporterlock.com.
I think in the 2009 Star Trek DVD release with the director's commentary, at one point J.J. Abrams was asked, "What's your favorite Star Trek movie?" And he says Galaxy Quest.
Yeah, such a great movie.
It is. And have you seen the documentary about Galaxy Quest?
I have, and it makes me sad because as great as it was, it could have been something even better.
It also could have been something worse.
I agree. I just listening to Sigourney Weaver saying, like, we had a really great R-rated movie here. They could have, and they made it PG, and PG was fun, but I think it could have been. I mean, I never saw the script, of course, or anything like that, and who the hell am I anyway? But
you're the co-host of Transporter Lock.
I suppose so. It would have been nice to have like an alternate cut on the DVD somewhere, that we could watch. That's Galaxy Quest is one of those movies that I can just put on in the background while I'm doing stuff, and it never gets old for me. I can just watch it over and over, and I don't know, it must be, well, Galaxy Quest was actually good, but I can do that with Mystery Men, Batman Forever, and a few of these other movies that are like these people are like, oh, it's awful. I'm like, that's why I love it.
Yeah, but how many of those have actor Justin Long?
Most of them, probably.
I suppose that's true.
He just shows up in random places. It's so great.